Rock this world!
Is music a universal language? Two different people from two different cultures, they can't speak any common language. Would they be able to express themselves through music, and would the things they say translate through that medium? Why or why not? Because you've been around a lot of different cultures, it sounds like, and your background is music, so you've studied this.
Yeah, and that's a great question, man. And unfortunately, the old adage or quote or whatever of music is the universal language isn't really accurate in my experience. And I'll tell you why. It's because the subtle differentiation is that music is universal like language. So every culture has language, right? You speak French, you speak Spanish, you speak German, whatever. Every culture has music, whether that's banging on a drum, whether that's sophisticated machinery like a saxophone or electronic computers or whatever. So every culture has language, every culture has music. Being able to play music does not necessarily mean that you can communicate with another culture if that's your only medium. So for example, like I can learn a song, like let's say a tribal song from a long lasting tradition of a group of, of a community in Africa. I can learn how to play it. I can learn how to make those sounds. I can learn the content. I can't necessarily replicate or understand the intent, right? So like, I could, same thing as anybody else parroting anything else, like people can learn how to speak a language by watching TV, and you might have somebody who sounds fluent in English or Spanish or whatever, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they know what they're saying. It's like, I can learn the lyrics. Like a good example of that is like Celine Dion. Like she sings, she's a native French speaker, that's her inherent natural language or whatever. And she speaks and sings in English all the time, but she also understands English, of course, too. But, you have that experience all the time where multinational artists, especially vocalists, of course, will learn how to sing in English because it's going to translate to a larger audience. But if it's just strictly music, again, like there's certainly Western music, which encompasses most of Europe, most of America, all that kind of thing. And then there's Eastern music, which is a whole different thing. There's African styles and genres, which are a whole different thing. That's the way I try to differentiate it the most easily, is saying music is universal like language. But just because you can make the words or the sounds doesn't mean you understand the message.
That makes a lot of sense because, music is history. It's shared experience in a lot of ways. And in the same way that you can speak like a different language, you might not understand the slang or the way some words actually hit in that language. I am kind of curious for Western music. You have the majors and the minors. Majors express like more happy, upbeat feelings, I guess. And then a minor is generally more downbeat or sad. I'm kind of curious if you've noticed the inverse in any culture specifically, where a song is played in a minor key, but it's expressing something happy.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, you're exactly right. That's kind of the framework that we've been taught to understand music through, using the Western musical lens. So we're like, oh, major is happy and minor is sad. Well, if those were the only two emotions you had as a human being, you'd be pretty under-equipped to deal with humanity and your life experience. So just like there's anxiety, or like there's, apprehension, or there's, excitement, but also being nervous, or you're happy, but it's also making you think back to the scenario that surrounded that happy moment with all the other factors and stuff. Happy and sad are two of an infinite list of emotions that you can experience and thus communicate. So you're right. That's kind of one of the distilled concepts for Western music. I wouldn't say that there's an inverse in it necessarily, but I would definitely say that, music around the world has broken free, from that two-party system, if you will. It's not just major is happy and minor is sad. You can certainly communicate, a lot of different, especially with lyrics, obviously, a lot of different messages and emotions, whether it's major or minor. And of course, those are just two of, multi ways of framing work. So when you get into other cultures and other musical histories, you're talking about systems of music that might not have 7 notes per scale. They might have 5 up to 20, this is what they call microtonal. So whereas we in the Western society are breaking it up into very specific measured segments, of dividing pitch and also time, they're dividing pitch and time a lot smaller segments, which of course expands your vocabulary, right? That's like saying if we had, 100 words and they had 300 words. It's like, well, if you got 300 words, you've got 3 times more opportunities to express the same thing, obviously, right? So when we say, oh, I've got, these 7 note scales, good. And that's a great way to, structure music and write music and record music and share information. And then when you get into those microtonal, whether it's subdividing pitch or time, really comes down a lot more to understanding the culture, because there's just ways that you can't replicate the sounds unless you've had, I wouldn't say an entire lifetime, but a significant exposure to it and a significant opportunity to participate in it.
I just want to add here that what you said about like lyrics and the way that like lyrics converge with music, some of my favorite music is like bubbly, super happy sounding songs with super depressing lyrics. It's just
right. You get that.
It does something for me. I love it. So your career was basically a military band member. From the outside, a military band can look fairly political, or even some might say propagandist, depending on the context. How true would you say that is? Like, as someone who's actually been in a military band, what did you kind of feel was its real purpose?
Yeah, I mean, so the thing about the military is that the military takes, is basically a snapshot of, American culture overall. When you talk about all the branches of the military, you're talking about several million people serving at any one time, which also means you've got several million, if not a couple billion, by now, people who have served over the course of history. And those people are coming from every background: rich, poor, black, white, whatever, religious, not religious, Christian, Buddhist, all that kind of stuff. So, it really is a good opportunity to just have a group of people that are coming from, a wide diversity of demographics and backgrounds. And thus their personal experiences are going to influence how they, accept what the mission is or the message is and those kind of things. Yeah, it certainly can be, and it's designed to be, a messaging tool. They often call it like a soft power, where you can influence opinion and, to some extent, decisions or actions through messaging with music. That said, it's not really as political as you might think, because what the band really does when you go to perform in a multinational environment is you are using the universal language of music to facilitate conversations about topics that we're in no way, shape, or form subject matter experts on. I'm not a strategist. I don't have anything to do with, troop movements or political activities or, decisions that are literally far, far, far above your pay grade. But what you can do is you can say, okay, we're going to have political leaders from this group and that group, whatever they are. And they're going to come together for a summit or a conference or a convention or something. And there might be, generally, obviously, there would be some tension or some, apprehension about this conversation that they're going to have, whether that's, a partnership, whether that's a joint exercise, whatever. And then just having the tool of music to kind of just smooth over the experience and, say, hey, it's not just all bullets and bombs. It's also, songs and lyrics, just like any culture, right? America, Russia, China, Germany, it doesn't matter. Everyone's got music. So by facilitating that conversation and illustrating that we're all fundamentally human beings with, generally speaking, the same goals, safety, family, personal health, striving for achievement, it just kind of, I wouldn't say diffuses, but certainly smooths over the environment and just, allows for a more relaxed opportunity to talk about things that might be a little bit more stressful.
What led you to, I guess, join the military? And when you were joining, like, were you literally signing up for like a military band position, or was it something you were just, put in because you had that experience? How does that kind of work?
Yeah, so I joined for money. Fundamentally, honestly, like that's what I joined. I grew up in Bismarck, North Dakota. Both of my parents were semi-professional musicians. They both went to college for music. And when I was getting ready to graduate high school, I already had my fall semester at a local college worked out. I knew what classes I was going to take. I had my roommate assignment, all that kind of stuff. Long story short, I ended up joining the Marine Corps band because the justification is like, do I want to pay a college however many thousands of dollars a year to learn music, or the Department of Defense is saying I have the skill set already, I'm going to go get paid to play music? Obvious, right? So I said, yeah, great, I'll do that. I don't come from a long line of military, service members. Obviously there's some people as you go back through the family tree in history, but it wasn't something my parents did. My grandparents didn't. It wasn't like I was just following in their footsteps. Yeah, fundamentally it was money and the opportunity for higher education, because it offered me they call it the GI Bill. You can take, you serve a certain period of time and then they give you money for college. And that's exactly what I did. Was in for 4 years. I joined in September of 2001, did 4 years, took my GI Bill, came here to the University of Northern Colorado in Greeley, Colorado. And using my GI Bill, I earned a K through 12 instrumental music education degree, and also my Colorado teaching license, which I renewed in 2024 or 23. So I still have an active teaching license. But honestly, at that point, way back then, I technically did what they called a delayed entry program. So I was kind of in the system in May of 2001. And then I went to boot camp September 17th, 2001. So, I went 6 days after 9/11. But even then, I think the political sphere or the political landscape was a lot simpler than it is now. And I'm not a political expert. I'm not a political scientist, anything like that, whatever. But it wasn't so much a question of that because effectively I joined, pre 9/11. And even when I was in, it's like I'm in the band. They're not going to send a guitar player to the front lines with some mortar launcher or something, unless things get crazy. It wasn't really something that we thought a ton about. I didn't have strong political affiliations going in. Obviously, my positions and opinions have changed as I've become older and scenarios and circumstances change. But yeah, for me, fundamentally, it was an opportunity to make money and get money for school. And then I got out and I missed it. I missed the camaraderie. I missed the organization. So I was out for about a year. And then I signed up for a 6-year contract with the Colorado Army National Guard Band here at Buckley Space Force Base. I did about 2.5 years of that. And then in my student teaching semester, I took an audition for and was offered a position with the Air Force Band. So I graduated December 2008, went right back into the military in 2009, did 11.5 years with the Air Force Band, and then went back to the Army in 2020 to finish up the time I needed to earn retirement. And then I retired in December of 2024.
As soon as you mentioned September 2001, I was like, did that play a role? But it sounds like the gears were actually already in motion before that happened.
Yeah.
Man, that's a wild time to have joined. And I was also going to say, you mentioned instead of going to college to learn, you just go right into and actually do. And I was like, that's a great way to learn as well. Like I actually skipped, I dropped out of college to go straight into journalism just because, the school model, the rote memorization and the tests don't really work well for me, but learning by doing is really effective for me. Have you been in every single branch of the military now, except maybe Space Force or?
Yeah, so I did Marine Corps first, and thankfully, the way that it works, and I think it is still this way today, if you serve in the Marine Corps first, you don't have to go back through the boot camps for other branches.
Interesting.
So like if you want to, like when I went into the Army National Guard, I didn't have to go to Army boot camp. When I went to the Air Force, I didn't have to go to Army Air Force boot camp. It sounds bizarre to be like, oh, I was in the Marine Corps, and then the Army National Guard, and the Air Force, and the Army. That's not entirely unique. There are many musicians and probably other people in different job career fields who can transfer and translate between branches with a lot more mobility and flexibility than a lot of people think. The antiquated kind of perspective was you're either going to do 4 years and get out, or you're going to stay in until you die and they kick you out. Like that's really it. But there's a lot of people who will switch branches. There's a lot of individuals I know who switch what they call components, where if you're active duty, you might go into the reserves or the National Guard. I definitely didn't serve in every branch, and they keep inventing new ones. But yeah, Marine Corps, and then it was Army National Guard, which of course is just based on states. So every state and the territories, Puerto Rico and Virgin Islands, I think, also have their National Guards. And then, of course, the Air Force. The thing about that is, you would think that because they're all military branches under the overarching umbrella of the Department of Defense, you're like, well, how different can they be? Extremely different. And it's not necessarily based on what you do. It's based on how you do it and the culture and the climate. So when people are asking me, they say, well, which did you like better, or which should I join or whatever? I say, well, here's the thing. By and large, you can do virtually any job you want in pretty much every branch. Army, Space Force, Navy, it doesn't matter. But every one of those branches is going to have a little bit different climate and history and culture and tradition and heritage and all those kind of things, right? So it's just kind of like finding a college, right? Where it's like, yeah, I can take a journalism major anywhere I want. Well, it's going to be a little bit different at Stanford than it is at Harvard. It's going to be a little bit different at UC Davis than it is at UC Berkeley. It's going to be, and it's not because you're learning necessarily different material or you're being asked to do something different, but it's going to be that culture and that vibe and that aura and whatever that's going to be like, yeah, that's my school for me, man. Or it's like, I didn't really get a good vibe over here. Like, I don't know, like the teachers seemed fine, the campus seemed fine, but I think this is for me. So my personal favorite, of course, was kind of, was my first love, if you will, because I joined the Marine Corps when I was 18. And just like everyone has a wonderful experience in college between 18 and 22 or 25 or whatever, I had a wonderful experience in the Marine Corps between 18 and 22. And then I had, wonderful experiences in the other branches too. But for me, I was very spoiled in that I had wonderful leadership from the get-go. And in fact, I was just talking with my second Marine Corps commander on Facebook like yesterday. I mean, I haven't worked with this guy since 2005. I'm looking at the calendar. It's 20 years later, and we're still talking because he's that attuned to being a leader in anything he would have ever done, whether he was a garbage truck supervisor or a Marine Corps band commanding officer, whatever, So that was the level of personal dedication and involvement and care that I had from square one. And of course, it's incredibly hard to sustain or replicate that for an entire career. So there were ups and downs with, really good leadership, really, really bad leadership, really good teamwork, really bad teamwork, all those kind of things.
So you mentioned earlier how like the military bands would go into these other places, they're kind of a meshing of cultures. I'm kind of curious, when that happened, are you guys catering, like building a set list that either has music that kind of aligns with the kind of styles of their culture, or even like actually incorporating some songs from their native culture? Or what kind of dictates like the kind of music you use at each individual like place or event?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of factors that go into programming repertoire. And those are exactly some of the things you're talking about. Some of the factors in no particular order include holidays. It's like, I'm not going to play, like just before we were talking here on the phone, I'm working on Christmas music because it's December 9th. I don't play as much Christmas music in June, surprisingly. So holidays play a big part of it. Obviously, like if you're going to play, a national anthem for another country, that's an obvious thing. But yeah, just like, if you try to go visit France or Spain or Germany or whatever, you try to learn a couple of, phrases and language, right? So yeah, we would definitely try to learn some of the local culture's music if we can, if it was realistically feasible. The double-edged sword on that is, of course, just like, biffing, hey, can you help me find the restaurant in French? And then they're laughing at you. It's the same thing as if you try to play some, 4,000-year-old, native song, and they're like, that's not really how it's supposed to go. So it's kind of touchy because you want to honor the culture and you want to honor the heritage, but you also don't want to diminish it or marginalize it by being like, look, we're doing what you're doing. And they're like, not really, man. Not really. So it was the funny thing about American culture, of course, is that America is a melting pot of all these different nationalities and heritages and traditions, right? So effectively, the only homegrown music that we have is jazz. Like that's one of those things where I would say if there is an American language, it's jazz, which then of course turned into like rock and roll and a lot of pop stuff and everything. Country music, country western music is pretty American. But it's like America's 250 years old. You're talking with cultures that have been around for thousands and thousands of years. So it was embarrassing in some instances when we tried to share culture. And American culture is just so disposable. It's so expendable. It's so disposable. So we're trying to play like a Katy Perry song or a Shakira song or something. And they're pulling out some like, ancient prayer from, 3,000 years before Christ. And you're like, there's no comparison. This is apples and oranges completely. So it wasn't necessarily a question of not doing it, because obviously American pop music is so prevalent now. And it's certainly one of the most prominent styles of music, partially because of technology, partially because of accessibility, partially because of, taste and trends. So as long as if you're playing, a Foo Fighters rock song, and then they come at it, in turn and say, okay, we're going to offer you some of our culture, it's just important to not try to have it appear as a comparison or equals. It's like, well, here's something we can give you and here's something you can give us. They're not the same, but we can appreciate both for what they are.
Were there ever things that were restricted in terms of music, whether because of like the content, the lyrics, the feel? What kind of things were allowed and what wasn't allowed and why?
So for the most part, pretty much everything was fair game with obvious exceptions. Like you really don't want to try to play a song that has an excessive amount of like colorful language, obviously, because that can certainly turn off some of your audience. If there were bands or artists who had like a very strong political stance themselves, obviously you'd try to, shy away from that because you don't want to present the image that the US military is supporting one or another perspective or stance or position, right? So, I mean, hypothetically, if artist X was like, a devout Republican, and you're like, well, that's his whole persona, like Kid Rock. Like, we're not going to play a Kid Rock song because everyone knows what Kid Rock's position is. And that's maybe not something that we want to present as the Department of Defense or America's position. But for the most part, I mean, as long as it didn't have like a lot of swearing, and as long as it wasn't assigned or associated with a very political stance, you're pretty much good to go. And then you just make smart decisions based on your own instrumentation, like who you have in the band and where you're going to be, So for example, if you're going to go play an event that is at an orphanage, right? Like, you want to play kids songs, you want to play fun stuff, You're not going to play some like super hard hitting like Pantera or something, right? It's like that's heavy, hard music. Now, if you're going to go play some like ramp up, let's go get 'em music for some forward operating based special operations team, then yeah, you want to fire them up because they've got a thing to do, and you don't want to be like sleepy time and good night. We got to go. We got to go. So it's not really so much about artist or song. It's more about energy. It's like the energy behind a song. So, I mean, some examples are like, AC/DC had some really big hits in the early 90s that are really closely associated with Desert Storm. And you'll talk to a lot of Desert Storm veterans and they'll say, yeah, man, AC/DC, whatever song, like that was we're going out. We're going out, man. We're going to get ramped up. We're going to get tough. But yeah, you might be playing for a child development center picnic, and it's like, well, then yeah, let's play some K-pop Demon Hunters, or let's play some Barney and Friends. Like, that's not a problem. And that's a good example of how music can be used in a lot of different ways. You can use it for a lot of different purposes. You can use it as art, obviously, but it's very functional too. For example, when you're going to play a parade, for a graduation ceremony or something, music is a function. You're playing music for people to march around to. It's not high art, but it's certainly important. When you're going to go play a parade for Veterans Day or something, you're maybe only playing like your service branch song, Air Force song, Marine Corps hymn, whatever, and maybe one or two other songs. So you're not making high art, but it's very impactful. You're playing for maybe 10,000, 20,000 people on the sides of the street, and everyone's going to hear it and everyone's going to appreciate it in different ways,
So here's another softball question. What is art? What makes something artistic in your mind? What is high art?
Well, I mean, and those are, again, antiquated terms, because what used to be viewed as low art can certainly be high art now. I mean, an example would be comic books. People used to think comic books were low art, but the artistic talent used in that is no different than somebody who's, painting this wonderful, fresco or something. So it's not really a question of high art and low art. And I honestly believe like you can make art out of pretty much anything. And you do. I mean, whether that's like, I'm going to make an omelet for lunch, that's a culinary art, whether you're going to, draw a picture for your wife and put it in her lunchbox before she goes to work, that's art. If you're playing some military march, and you're like, oh, this is boring. It's like, but it doesn't have to be. It's like, I'm not saying like do a bunch of things to change what it is, but the art is in the process too, So unfortunately, what happens in a lot of military bands is you have very highly educated, very experienced, very trained, very talented musicians who join the military band thinking that they're going to be doing art. And there is art to be made, but it's not sitting in a conservatory in some auditorium, doing these very, very fine minutia things. Although you certainly do that sometimes. The example I have is like, how people could write the, Constitution or something on like a grain of rice. It's like, that's what people want music to be. What we're doing is we're taking the big bag that the rice came in with like this big magic marker and writing art on it. Like, you're just painting with broader strokes because you're trying to reach a lot of different demographics. Some musicians in the civilian sector are very, very focused. I wouldn't say pigeonholed, but very focused, where it's like, I'm a jazz saxophone player. I'm a rock drummer. I'm a country guitar player. Wonderful. In the military band, you're playing for your fellow soldiers, right? And whatever ages and demographics those are. You're playing for multinational soldiers. You're playing for U.S. political leaders, international political leaders, the families of all of those people. So I mean, you're expected to reach a far broader audience than most musicians do in their career or experience.
So it sounds like you've played in a lot of different spaces for a lot of different people. I'm kind of curious if there's ever been spaces where rich and poor have commingled, like you have your dignitaries, your executives, but then you also have maybe the common people. I'm kind of curious what that feels like and what role music maybe plays in a space like that.
Yeah. So, I mean, as you're asking that question, the first thing that came to my mind was playing in Angola. So Angola is a country on the west side of Africa, borders the water. And I don't remember the numbers of the metrics or anything, but what I remember hearing was that it was one of the countries in Africa or maybe worldwide that had one of the widest disparities between the haves and the have-nots, right? There was a huge influx of commerce and industry and business from China and from other countries that are taking advantage of the opportunities in Africa to advance their own goals, business, shipping, industry, whatever. And you get out of the city and it's just destitute, absolute poverty. I mean, just the worst poverty you can imagine. And that might be a difference of, 2 miles or 10 miles or something. It's not like, oh yeah, way over there's like this, homeless camp. It's like, no, it's right here. So yeah, that definitely is an interesting thing to observe, where one day you're playing in a 5-star hotel, with, $1,000 plate dinners for political leaders. And the next afternoon you're playing on a dirt patch for kids, that do not have clothes or shoes. And of course, your attitude for that's got to change. You can't have your cocktail hour grip and grin, stance when you're going to talk to kids that like just need to eat food. So honestly, like when I would go into those kind of situations, yes, we're there to play music, but really we're just there to build connections and try to connect with, the kids or the teachers or whoever it is, because, they don't care that we're playing another, Mariah Carey song or whatever. They're just happy to see, people who are there. And to some extent too, we would try to bring, materials or things that we could share with them, whether that was school supplies, whether that was, just snacks or bottled water or whatever. But yeah, it's really interesting, the variations of audiences that you might have just in the course of your duties. And again, it's like you might be a musician playing in Colorado or New York or wherever, and you're mostly playing for a certain demographic in a certain place. You're like, oh, I play a lot of jazz clubs or I play a lot of country bars or whatever. But, to fly down to Africa from Germany and then go stay in like a 5-star hotel because you've got to be there for a political convention. And then the next afternoon, you're just in a dirt field or living in a tent or something. Very interesting. Yeah.
Did you or your colleagues ever, for lack of a better way to say this, ever have reservations or concerns about some of the audiences you played for? And if so, like, how did you manage those feelings, or how did it shape what you did in front of those audiences?
I don't know that we ever had reservations about who we were playing for, unless it was a security and safety thing. There were certainly a couple of gigs where we played, if you're on like a bordering nation that's being kind of pulled in the direction of like Western influence or Eastern influence. And then of course, you've got audience members who are leaning one direction or the other. So yeah, there might be some safety and security things, but honestly, I mean, again, the intent and the goal was just to present kind of a non-threatening position of saying, hey, yeah, we represent the United States military. We represent the United States overall. But just like your country, just like your people, just like your citizens and communities, we're all different. We're all coming from different places. It's like not everyone in Russia is a devout, Putin follower. Obviously, not everyone in America is a devout president follower. So it's just trying to create those connections of saying like, hey, you live here, we live here. You guys have this political party in charge. We have this political party in charge. We're all still fundamentally the same. At the end of the day, we all got to eat, poop, sleep. Like that's the real thing, And again, I mean, if we're, whatever we were playing, music, songs, it's like we just tried to present that with an attitude of, hey, let's try to be friends, man, for everyone's mutual benefit. And generally speaking, that went over pretty well. I mean, you're always going to, just like in America too, it's like you're always going to have some segments or some percentages of whoever's there that has a different opinion or wants to make a stink about something. But those are very, very small outliers. And most of the time, the overwhelming majority of whoever's there is going to say, hey, this is fun.
So you mentioned Russia, and I'm actually now curious, did you like perform in Russia or other places that are considered, I don't want to say necessarily hostile to the US, but like kind of more antagonistic places?
Yeah, so I never played in Russia. Some bands have been in different places at different times, based on security considerations and accessibility. We did play a lot when I was stationed in Germany. We played a lot in the Ukraine, which of course has a huge, history and connection to, Russia and politics and things like that. We played in Poland a lot. We played in a lot of those countries like up in the northern area, like Lithuania, Estonia, all those kind of things. And then, of course, when you get deployed to the Middle East, you're playing in Kyrgyzstan and Iraq and Afghanistan and Jordan, Israel, United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Oman, all those different places. So yeah, There are, again, based on this, it's really based on individuals' history too, where it's like we would play for some audiences, we're like, man, this might be a tough sell because I don't know how friendly or happy they are with America. And it goes over great. And then you might play with, in some audience, for some audience that you're like, yeah, this is going to be an easy hit, man. We can knock it out of the park. And there's like one or two people that had, unfortunate experiences in their own personal past that has clouded or influenced their perception of America. And there's nothing you can do about that. I mean, you try to win over who you can, but like me as a military musician, there's no way I could overturn somebody's personal experience of like having their parents kidnapped by a regime or having their brother killed, in service of something else, or having their cousin conscripted into a military they didn't want to serve in. Like, no, there's nothing I can do to minimize that pain and that experience. I mean, again, those are unique scenarios, and you try to deal with all of them. And the same thing applies for, our own forces too, where many times we would be playing at a forward operating base or some kind of an event. And just the fact that we were there to kind of like, cool the scenario down and have people share their, concerns or their emotions with us. I'm not a counselor. I'm not a priest. I'm not anything like that. But, many times before or after a gig, I'd be talking with somebody who just got back from their 300th mission or something. And they're like, I just want to vent. I'm like, dump it on me, man, because I play guitar. Like, I'm not eating dirt and bullets every day. You can share some of your weight with me, and hopefully I can take some of that and relieve your own baggage you got to carry, man.
That's a really important aspect of music, in my opinion. Is no, you're not a counselor, but there is a certain amount of therapy and catharsis that you can get through music, and I really love that about it. So essentially, what your career was kind of like a cultural exchange. It sounds like sharing music, ideas, things of that nature. I'm kind of curious, what was maybe the biggest thing you felt you shared through music, and maybe the biggest thing that changed you through these experiences that you kind of brought home with you?
Well, I mean, I think it would be really hard to say what the biggest impact I ever had was, because unfortunately, it's not like a sales job or something where you're like, oh, we launched this marketing campaign and now sales went up 18%. You're like, great, we did it. That was one of the hardest parts really about being in the military band, was collecting metrics to see what the impact was. So metrics you could collect would be like, how many people were at the event? 500. Okay, great. If you did a television show or a radio program, what's your listenership? What's your viewership? Oh, you've got 1 million viewers? Great. Oh, you've got 400,000, readers for this magazine? Great. Beyond that, I mean, that's like asking you is like, at what point did you start liking pizza? It's like, I don't remember like the instant that I was like, that's it. When I got that Pizza Hut deep dish for reading books in 3rd grade, now I'm a pizzaholic. Like, it's really hard to pinpoint the impact of what you're doing when it's something that's as esoteric or ambiguous as art. I think the biggest impact for me, which I, hopefully can measure and quantify or whatever, was just that, having that perspective that most musicians just don't, because of the logistics and the accessibility of having the chance to see music in action in a lot of different ways, whether that was an orphanage, whether that was a private school, whether that was a music conservatory, whether that was, an awards ceremony for a president, whether that was a graduation ceremony, Veterans Day parade, playing at a dining facility, at a deployed environment. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. There's so many different places where you see music in action. And that's really the thing about music, is that, like, going back to the first thing we talked about, is it a universal language? No, but music is so prominent and prevalent in every culture and every event and every stage of life and those kind of things, that it's one of the few things, that and food are really the only two things, that like transcend cultures. So you see it everywhere and you get a chance to do it everywhere. And that's what I like too, as a guitar player and a bass player. You might be the world's best oboe player, but you're probably not going to play AC/DC, and you're probably not going to play a bunch of this stuff, because different instruments are used in different ways. Well, thankfully, my instruments are used in a lot of different ways, which afforded me the opportunity to learn and thus appreciate a lot of different styles: country, rock, jazz, funk, R&B, pop, all those different things that another instrumentalist just might not have a chance to have exposure to.
That sounds like a way good note to end on. We've gone full circle now. Do you have anything you'd like to add in closing, or any like socials or a website that you want to refer people to, or a closing message?
Sure. I mean, I'm on Facebook and I'm on YouTube. So if you just type in my name, Alex Nikiforoff, on YouTube, you'll see a couple of videos and stuff. It's not a channel that like I maintain daily or anything, but when I get a little bit of time and when I get a little bit of ambition, sometimes I'll upload a couple of songs there. But I guess only to try to promote and sustain the programs that I had such a wonderful experience participating in. It's really unfortunate that in the last 25, 30 years, military band programs have been absolutely decimated. So, for example, my last duty station before I retired was one of 5 active duty Army bands that was deactivated just that year. I've seen entire programs go away. The Air Force National Guard band program went away entirely. Bands are either going away or they're being cut down with a lot, for manning and stuff, which is unfortunate because the expense of what it costs to run a band versus the impact and the potential is so unbalanced. It doesn't cost anything to run a band. So like my brother's a pilot and he asked me one day, he's like, hey, what is it? What's your guys' average annual budget? And I said the number or whatever. And he's like, I can't even fuel up my plane for that to do one flight. And that's your guys' annual budget for like a 50-person unit. So it's unfortunate that politics and, those who are in charge aren't necessarily appreciating the impact that bands can have, for the very, very, very minimal low cost of what it costs to run them. But, we'll see. We'll see how it goes. So unfortunately, because those programs are being downsized all the time, that also restricts the opportunity for employment in this company. It used to be there were, hundreds of bands and thus thousands and thousands of job options. But with the bands being cut all the time, when people say, hey, this is a career path, that I should consider, it's a real hard time saying yes because there are just so few jobs. I was very fortunate to stay in for, 23 calendar years, but somebody joining now today in 2025 would have a real hard time getting into the program in the first place and then hopefully staying in the job that they want through all of our political, economical turmoil.
It is incredibly unfortunate. And I think that honestly speaks to just a bigger problem we have in American culture right now, maybe globally, but especially American, where we just don't, like, for whatever reason, we're not valuing art like we used to and like we should, because I do think it helps round people out. It really does. I feel like without art, without music, we get closer and closer to like normalization of violence, really. And so, yeah, I would 100% endorse funding and expanding any like military band program personally, and just the arts in general. I'm really glad you were able to have the experience you did, and I'm also really glad you were able to share it with us. I thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and insights, and I hope things turn around for all of us.
Yeah, me too, man. It's a privileged experience that I had and a unique perspective that I was able to gain. And, I'm still trying to share music with people, whether that's me being on stage or teaching lessons and stuff, because like you said, music and art and the humanities are a valuable component of being a human. And that's important,
Did you enjoy this video? Hit like on YouTube or rate the podcast 5 stars on Spotify if you did. And share it if you think it could help others. Please also subscribe, check out my other videos, even if it's just as white noise, or support the channel via buymeacoffee.com/rockmarketingllc. I love learning, talking with people, and sharing ideas that can benefit anyone who listens. Your support helps me keep creating and covering the costs that go into making this content. Please drop any questions in the comment section and suggest yourself as a guest if you have a topic you're passionate about. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to sharing more with you soon.